Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about anticipating problems prematurely. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how we can see problems before they happen and how to lead into them preventatively. We're going to talk about preventing these kind of common problems when it comes to planning for events, as well as avoiding sticky situations among staff and volunteers. We're also going to talk about preventing burnout and mental health crisis as we learn how to expect the future. At the end of this episode, I'm going to give you 3 takeaways to be able to help you apply what we talk about today in your own leadership and organization. And every week we come out with a new episode to be able to help you tap into your hidden potential. We do that by giving you practical and mental tools to be able to use within your leadership. Let's get started with a big thought, and that is the idea that one of the greatest qualities to acquire as a leader is the ability to anticipate a problem before it ever happens. A leader should have a results-driven perspective that sees a holistic reactions from different instances that arise over time. While it may not always come naturally, learning how to anticipate is a skill that can be learned and crafted and even cultivated with time and experience. Simply put, the leader that you are 10 years from now should be able to avoid a lot of the problems that you experience in year one. And it's this idea that because of the learned experiences you get over the years, you're able to be preventative to where you're not experiencing the same problems over and over. You start to get better at anticipating those problems. So let's get started with the first category, which is events. And when it comes to anticipating problems that arise for events, with each of these, I'm going to kind of give you a little story for my own, and as we relate to how it can be applied to you. So for me, I remember when I was still a youth pastor, we would do these like youth conferences once a year in the summertime. And they were always a big deal. It was a big event. And our church was around like 400 to 500 people. And our youth group, we would be able to get about 40 to 50 kids to be able to go to these conferences. Typically, we'd fill up an entire bus every year as we would get ready for this event. And from the first time that I did it, after gathering the funds and having a meeting with the parents for this big event, I felt almost embarrassed when I had all of these questions that were asked me after the first meeting. It's where it was like nonstop people asking questions. Well, what about this? Who's going to be in the rooms? How do we get a hold of our kids? Are they going to have their phones? All these questions that came up. And year after year, it was my goal to try to answer those questions before they were asked. And by the end of it, the last year that I was a youth pastor at that church, I created this entire pamphlet and packet to give to each of the parents. And it pretty much answered all of their questions. They even had who was going to be in which room. It had even a short bio of every room leader and the numbers to contact them. And it was just all the information over the years that I learned that people were going to want to know. And I anticipated all these questions and problems that would come up to where that year, there was not one single question that was asked in the parents' meeting before going on that trip. It was the most prepared trip that I had, not because I was exceptionally great that I just answered all these questions, but it's this learned experience where I anticipated these questions and problems before they rose. So to understand how we can look at our own events, some key principles is to learn to remember the details and transitions when it comes to events. The details and transitions often get unnoticed. We think like, oh, we're going to have a big event where it's a keynote speaker and we're going to have a band play music. Well, that's all great, but there's a lot of details that go into that. Like who's going to set up the band's equipment? Who's going to set up the slides? Who's going to create the slides? Who's going to turn off the lights? It's like every little detail matters. And what really helps is to plan out the service from beginning to end. And that includes all the preparation, all the food that's going to be there. Are you going to need plates? Who's going to be putting out those plates? Do people need to sit down? Are they going to stand up? You need to start thinking about all of these details for each of those key parts of the event. It helps when you have meetings with other people, so it's not just all on you. The key here is to just know that the details matter. I think one of the most inspiring things I ever saw at a church was in a moment where they had an intermission. They had food available, and where the food plate was already a part of the package, what have you. And at the station for food, they had signs made, not signs that like paper folded over with a Sharpie written what it was. It had a actual sign like they ordered from Vistaprint that said brisket. That's all it said. It was just but a professional sign of saying what food is where. And for me, I was just so inspired. Like they literally thought about how are people going to distinguish where's the food, and they went the extra mile in thinking about the details to get a sign made just to establish right here, this is where the brisket is. And it gave such a smooth transition to the food, to where people weren't looking around saying, oh, well, where's this one? I ordered this. Where's the Chick-fil-A option? It was just so clear by a simple sign that was already made. And it wasn't made the day of. It's premeditated. It's those kinds of details. And the transitions of knowing what you're going into, of leading people in events of what they're going to be going into next. You want to establish clear closing and saying, this ends this part of our service, we're now dismissed, or this ends this part of the service, we're now going to go into our next part. We're going to have some announcements for you. You just want to lead those transitions well to where you're answering people's confusion. You're answering questions. You're making it as abundantly clear as possible. And this is just kind of like an extra for you, and that is the idea that some of the most meaningful things about events is in the hello and the goodbye. And that's typically what people remember the most when they go to events is how it was introduced, how the welcome was, and how the ending was. And if you understand that key part, you will make your events incredibly better as you learn how to make that hype just so appropriate for the hello and the goodbye. Another thing about events is what I'm saying over and over, and that is to be abundantly clear and then be more clear. I don't know how many times I've led an event or thought I made clear transitions and realized that people were still confused. You have to imagine that people are going to these events blind in a sense, and they don't know what you know. It's your job to make it abundantly clear, and that will help eliminate a lot of the problems that might come up. And then finally, when it comes to events, is learn how to delegate as many tasks as you possibly can. And that requires having a great volunteer team, some people around you, but that also requires you simply asking people for help. Do not wait for people to ask you for help. People feel empowered when you give them responsibility. They feel appreciative. And anyone that doesn't want to, well, you could just move on and ask someone else. But you want to try to delegate as many things as possible, because if you're the one leading the event, you are going to have your mind everywhere. And a common problem for that I would have is being when it comes to unique skill, like not unique skills, but specific things that need more instruction that you have to train somebody to do. Like, for example, if you have to set up music or audio equipment, that requires instruction. It can't just be like, hey, can you be in charge of setting up the chairs? But you have to get clear about where you want the chairs to be set up. How far apart do you want them? How many rows do you want? And when it comes to the day of, you don't want to have to be being pulled back and forth like, hey, is this look okay? Is it this many chairs? Hey, how do I roll up this wire? You want to be able to delegate the responsibilities to others. And it's in those meetings beforehand that you can iron out the details of how exactly you want those things to be done, so that the event of isn't requiring all of this attention, that you're able to have all those details worked out beforehand, because you're going to be busy doing other stuff and during the actual event. Now, number 2, we're going to be focusing on staff and volunteers. And for me, there's a while back where I had a staff member that that ended up coming to me and saying that they really appreciated a volunteer and that they wanted to pretty much donate part of their paycheck to this volunteer so that they could be on payroll too. And it was a really nice gesture. It was a great gesture. But see, what I anticipated was that even though it's nice right now, it won't feel that nice over time. You're going to eventually feel the pain of that paycheck, and you're going to either end up looking for another part-time job, or you're going to subconsciously feel disgruntled as you no longer feel as satisfied with your income. And so even though it's nice, I said, no, we're not going to do that, but we'll work out another way to appreciate them. And it was a simple example of being able to see that even though it seemed like a good thing, anticipating that it would cause problems later on. And going into this, when we're talking about staff and volunteers, you want to be able to give clear instructions, even in writing, to where you can promote just this clarity of how to do their jobs. I think that most people feel disgruntled or end up having problems with their role or with their job, whether it's volunteer or paid, when they feel like they don't know exactly what they're supposed to do. If they don't feel equipped or they don't feel prepared, then it's gonna cause problems, not only for them and how they feel internally, but it's gonna be causing problems for you. And sometimes people will try to back off and think, well, I don't want to micromanage them. But if they're doing it wrong and they don't know if they're doing it right, it's just gonna continue to create problems and tension. There's nothing wrong with saying, I want it done this way. That micromanaging isn't that. That's giving clear instruction. And so you want to be able to, again, promote that clarity. And even when it comes to certain jobs, you may even want to encourage practicing or role play scenarios. Like I encourage people who are going to be hosting or speaking for the church to practice their announcements, to practice the different scenarios that they're in, because it will make them feel more confident when it comes to the actual action plan. Another thing about staff and volunteers is that you can never really overappreciate someone. Especially when people are working hard and they're showing up. Even if they just show up, you should be given participation awards. Just give a perfect attendance award to somebody, because there's so many people that do not show up. And regardless of what they do once they're there, showing up matters. And you want to be able to appreciate those who have been consistent. You need to be able to show that you see them, you see their efforts, and you see their consistency. And you can never over appreciate them. When you give good appreciation to your staff and volunteers, you will eliminate a lot of staff problems by doing that. And another thing about staff and volunteers is that you should periodically ask them if they're happy where they're at. Whether it's them feeling, if they're happy and content, that's great. But you want to consider their mental well-being, their emotional well-being while they're working with you. You want to make sure that they're even happy with their job description, that you want to consider their talents and their ambitions, their desires. Maybe they even have a desire to be doing something else within your group or organization that they've never necessarily voiced. But if you ask them, you give them opportunity, it might be even a role that would work great for them and great for you, to where it's something you've been looking for someone to fulfill. And on top of that, you want to know if they're feeling happy with their being connected with your organization, your ministry. And if they're not, you want to be able to see how you can solve those problems, because it is not fun when you have a disgruntled or unhappy employee or volunteer that leaves out of bitterness or hurt feelings. It feels terrible. Because especially when it comes to ministry, like everything is personal. Like it's not just business. You become friends with these people. You pray for these people. It is very emotional type of work. And so when people leave like that, it really does hurt you a lot more than people may realize. Like the leader is probably the most affected when it comes to people being hurt by or upset with their job at ministries and organizations of nonprofits and churches. It feels like this big weight over your shoulders, to where you could eliminate that second guessing, that imposter syndrome, that insecurity of people leaving by simply checking to see how people are doing periodically and making sure that they're happy. If there's anything, there's sometimes where people really just want like a small change and they would be so happy. Like they want to come in at this time instead of that time, or they want to move this around in their schedule. They feel like they could be doing more, they could be doing less. And there's small fixes that could really be easily fixed to where it make them happy. And that's what you want. You want to have happy employees and volunteers. And also consider who they're working with, what kind of people they're working with, if they work well with certain people or not with certain people. Don't be pairing up people that they don't like, because it's just going to cause unnecessary friction and tension within the workplace. You want to have people around people that like each other. You don't want to force these people together that don't fit, because it's going to create problems. It's not about them being mature to just grow up. You need to be responsible in how you're positioning people so that they can best thrive, instead of making them work that much harder to enjoy their job. Now, the last part that we're going to talk about is your personal and mental health. And I think it was back in like 2020 when we were all of our workplaces were doing like remote, and my workplace at the time was doing they did like a stress inventory test, something like that. I don't remember the specifics, but I ended up going through the test and realized, and it was like, if you score above this many points, and you have a 20% chance of a mental breakdown or emotional or physical disorder. It's like it gauges your stress and connecting it to your health. And I ended up doing it. I was like several hundred points over my stress limit, to where it's like 80% chance that you're going to have some type of health issue. And I was like taken back, but also when I looked at the year, I was like, well, I guess that makes sense. And I ended up doing the last like several years, and I was like 3 years in a row, I had succumb myself and my family to this increasingly amount of stress, some of which unnecessarily. Some of the things were preventative, while others was just like life happening, and it made me see things in a completely different light. Because at the time when I was taking on this extra stress, I thought, well, I can handle it. But it was like the next year, or even 2 years later, all of a sudden I didn't understand why I was feeling burnt out, why I was feeling so emotionally down or discouraged or depressed, when it seemed like everything was okay. But you have to understand that burnout and emotional stress typically comes with a delayed reaction. You may have a really busy, super difficult month and feel like you made it through, but then 3 months later, you're feeling wiped out and you don't know why. It has this delayed reaction. Once you understand that, it helps you to take more intelligent decisions when it comes to how you handle your life. As a simple example for me, there's a time where I knew that we had a lot of things coming up for our church, and we had just had a kid, but we also had thought about moving. But then I took a step back and remembered that stress test, and I considered, well, we just had another kid, and we have these other things that we can't change. Let's not move for at least 2 years, so that we can really allow ourselves to recoup, because moving is a lot of stress, and we've done that in the past, and it's going to just end up overwhelming. And that simple decision saved us a lot of headache. It saved us so much emotional stress by choosing not to do something that we didn't have to do. We may have wanted to at the time, but choosing not to just saved us that little bit of stress. And being preventative in your emotional health is within your grasp and decision-making abilities. What goes into that is to also understand that you need to strive to have a rest day and force yourself to rest that day. Don't think that, well, I still have to get these things done and I have this free time, so I'm going to just do it. I'm telling you, that is how you're going to burn out. And I'm not trying to, I have to be clear, because I still want to promote hard work ethic. Okay, we should be grinding, especially early on in leadership. But you have to also allow yourself to have that rest day, to where you have a specific day where you're choosing not to do things that are related to work. And for me, that's typically like my family day, to where I will, it's a day with my kids and it's all about the family. I'm not doing any other work. and I'm just focused on my family and spending time with them. And there's other times where it's like it's more of like a rest evening because like every evening, me and my wife typically have something. I think like even right now in this season of our life, I think we have either 1 or 2 evenings that we're free throughout the week. And I'm talking about after we put the kids to bed, we still have work throughout the week that we have to do, whether it's meeting with people or doing small groups. We have all these extra things to where before I know it, it's all if I say yes to one more thing, then I have no rest day, no evening to rest, and I have no decompression time, and I'll go crazy like that. And so you have to again, make yourself take that rest day. There's again, I have that one day of the week that's family day, and I have a specific evening to where I choose not to do anything, to where I have it blocked off my calendar to where this is a night where I'm just chilling. I have my day with my family. This night right here is for me to chill, decompress, do stupid stuff, play video games, watch a movie, whatever it is that I want to do in that moment. That's that evening to rest. And in that same vein, I gotta say that there's times where emergencies come up, and people will try to require you, even in those evening times or those rest times. And it seems like everyone always has an emergency, and so you have to again let those simple times be yours, unless it's like a dire emergency, right? But don't allow people to convince you everything that they're going through is an emergency. Don't break your back for people, and don't sacrifice your family for people on these specific days, because it will just continue to consume you. And in that note, you have to understand that those people that if you sacrifice your family for, and I've said this on this podcast before, if you're sacrificing your spouse, your family for these people over and over and over, to where it's supposed to be family day, it's supposed to be date night, and you're continuously sacrificing your family, your marriage for them, at the end of the day, those people might not even be with your church or be with your ministry in a year from now. And your family is committed to you. Like that, no matter what, that will be your wife, your husband forever. It may turn into ex-wife or ex-husband, but they're forever connected with you in some way. Those will always be your kids. This person, once they leave, it'll just be a person that used to go. And so do not sacrifice your family, yourself, on these specific days that you establish as rest days or family days or date nights. And the last thing I'll say about this is, when it comes to your personal mental health, is that you have to really grasp that you cannot expect anyone else to have the same level of commitment for your mission as you do. No one else is going to care about what it is you're leading like you do. And if you do expect people to do that, you're going to continuously burn yourself out and feel emotionally drained and wondering, how come I'm the only one doing this? You've got to remind yourself, you're the leader. No one else will care as much as you do. The very next person may care about it, like if they're great, outstanding, they may care about it at 70%, maybe 80%, but they will never care about it as much as you do. And once you grasp that, you'll understand that not necessarily, no one is necessarily forever. That there will be people who come and go and have different seasons, and it will give your mental health and emotional state so much more peace and easier to let things go when you recognize, well, I appreciate these people for the season that they were here, rather than thinking, how could they leave? I can't believe, I thought they were committed. I thought they were a lifer. You got to just remember that people change, people move on, people move physically, geographically, and sometimes people just aren't there anymore. And you cannot continually get down on yourself when that happens. That's just life. And you are the leader. You're the one moving ahead. And so don't burn yourself out mentally, emotionally when it comes to other people's commitment. You can only lead the best that you can. You can inspire people, and as much as you inspire, you just have to remember that you carry the height of commitment for your organization. I hope that all makes sense. With that being said, let me give you 3 takeaways, and that is, number 1, review the last event that you hosted or planned and examine how you could have avoided the problems or difficulties that arose during the planning or during the actual event. Number 2, review the health of your current staff and volunteers and consider what is an underlying problem within the group, and critically think about what actions you can take to either change the course or be preventative. And number 3, establish reasonable times that you can be available to others and make your own personal rest non-negotiable. Have certain days where people can meet with you, and then have a time that people cannot meet with you, and let it be a non-negotiable in your life. I hope that what we talked about today was meaningful and edifying to you and your leadership. Could you do me a favor? Could you leave me a rating and review for this podcast? It'd really help me out and help others be able to see this show in their feed. Until next time, have a great life. Well, there you have it. I hope that this episode was meaningful and edifying for your leadership and your growth within your ministry and organization. Could you do me a favor? Could you leave a rating and review for this podcast? It'd really help me out and help others be able to see this show in their feed. You can also visit homerhargrove.com to be able to learn more, connect, or become one of our supporters. Until next time, have a great life.